Hello and welcome to this edition of The Guest, your best edition on Gabon 24. And today we're talking about Independence Days. As you know, African countries, many of them are celebrating their independence during this month of August. And we want to know today if these Independence Days are really symbolic, are really meaningful for the African countries. And to discuss it, I receive here on this set Dr. 𝐷𝐔𝐄𝐒. You are a professor in philosophy at CERP at Omar Bongo University. Hello.
Hi, thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome. So to begin with, more than 60 years after the first major wave of African independence, what should the word independence mean to an African in 2026?
Well, thank you for the question. That's an interesting question to look at, especially from the perspective of, not only from the perspective of Africans themselves, but also from the perspective of researchers that I am and scholars. It is important to look at the substance of the concept. Sovereignty, by definition, refers to the ultimate authority of a country, of a state, to determine its destiny in the process of decision-making, policy designing, and so forth. So the question of whether we are we independent or not needs to be analyzed through different lanes, through different aspects. We have to look at the different segments of a state to be able to decide whether it is the state is independent. So one of the segments, the most significant one, is the economic. So we all know that economically, most of the African countries are still dependent on their raw materials, and we know that the exploitation of the raw materials is generally made outside of their states. So which means that the transformations and the added value of those raw materials and the world process doesn't really much benefits the country from where they are extracted from. So it means that looking at the issue of sovereignty, it is precisely asking the question if whether we are subject, authors of our economic and decision making on the resources or not. Okay. So that's one of the aspects.
So let's move forward about it. You're talking about sovereignty, as a main issue in this, but does political independence and sovereignty are equal? Can we be independent without being sovereign?
Well, when you look at the political context, you will see that we have, for sure, we have already acquired
a level of independence. We have our own assembly, our parliament, we have...
We can call it a jurisdictional independence. Okay. Like we have an anthem, we have a flag, we even have a territory that has limits and so on. So on that side, we can say, yes, we have a sort of independence. But when you go deeper, you will also see that most of our constitutions and laws are still designed on the model of the Western powers, especially the ancient colonial power, which is France. Okay. So everything is still copy-pasted, at least, or let's say inspired from there. Yeah. But if we are looking at being really sovereign, we should be able to have our own way of deciding, of thinking, of designing laws, and so on that are inspired by our own history.
You're talking about the 𝐶𝐶𝐶𝐶.
For example.
Which comes from France?
Yeah.
and that we are still using to like create our laws.
Not only, even the way institutions are designed, we still have here, for example, in Gabon, the Senate, the Parliament, the National Assembly. These institutions that are political
inspired by the French.
Absolutely inspired by the French colonial power. And when we think, and when you look at the discourse and the narrative of the scholars on the issue, we are actually discussing the idea that being sovereign, it is also being able to culturally determine our own way of thinking and doing things in this regard. So, yeah.
But now, you're talking about, you talk about economic sovereignty, raw materials, the fact that we're still exporting raw materials and importing like
goods.
Finished, goods. So, on this specific aspect, do you think that it is because we are not independent, or maybe because African nations have become a bit infantilized, like they're still waiting for things to come towards them, they don't want to work for them to reach that level?
It is important to be factual here. It is important to read this question.
Talking about leadership.
Yes, it is important to look at this issue in a factual way. Let me take a more recent example. Our president recently went to France, and it was an official visit, but he went to France, and among all the topics that he had to discuss with the President Macron, he was also putting on a table of discussion and negotiations the exploitation, the transformation of manganese by 𝐶𝐄𝐒, which is the subsidiary company of the group Eramet. And he was saying that, well, we will no more accept that our raw materials are exported and exploited, transformed elsewhere than in our country, and the added value benefiting a country that is outside and not our own. It means in terms of employment being created and so on. So he put that on the table. But what was the result of that? His expectations on that were lowered, I would say, were lowered.
But at least he got some. He didn't come out of it with nothing.
He got some, and that's also the thing. I mean, symbolically, that's what I would even appreciate with our president. It is the ability to be able to put the finger
and negotiate
where it harms.
Okay, let's talk about the currency, because we're talking about economic independence. What about the franc CFA or CFA franc?
Absolutely. You cannot pretend being sovereign if you don't master, if you don't have the control on your monetary policies.
Exactly.
It is absolutely impossible, because the money is actually what makes all the other things, all the other segments of the society to work. So the issue on CFA is one of the element, one of the argument that most of the political analysts and the financial analysts are putting on the table to kind of say that, well, we are still not independent because our money, we don't own it, we don't control it. Even the process of making it, it's still down there in France in one of a small village or city of France. We don't control that. And sometimes even when economically things are not working well with us, they kind of devalue the currency, and with direct impact on on the populations and the citizens' life.
Okay.
So
I want to talk about, we're talking about August, the month of August. Most countries that got independence were French-speaking countries. And now we have people or countries like in the Sahel region, like we have Mali, we have Niger, we have Burkina Faso, where some military now are in power. And there is like an iron fist. like they're struggling, fighting against the former colonial power to say that now this is our own way to do this and do that. And there is a contrast with Gabon, 𝐷𝐔𝐄𝐒, that did also a coup d'etat, but it says that, okay, let's try to find a kind of, middle in the way we're doing things. Regarding to independence, sovereignty, what can we learn from that?
Well, that is an interesting issue because sovereignty is also saying that we have to be the subject and no more the object used by the others. That's kind of a philosophical analysis. Yeah. Like you have to be autonomous. And that autonomy of willingness of being and wanting to be and to exist in the concert of nations is also the idea that you must be able to make decisions based on your own vision, and it should not be influenced by external powers. There should not be interference in terms of, for example, of military. If you want to build your your protection, your security, you have to be able to acquire your military equipment on your own. You have to be able to do it willingly. And we see that was one of the debates that was put there in Western Africa, especially in Burkina Faso, whereby they were mostly saying, we asked France, for example, to buy weapons. They said, no, we cannot sell weapons to you, and so on and so on. But how can you secure your territory if you are not even begging, you are actually asking to buy?
With ISIS attacking them and they have to defend themselves.
So what we can learn regarding your question, what we can learn is, first of all, the idea of self-determination. If you want to be sovereign, if you want to be independent, you have to build on your own the means of that independence. The independence is not given, it's not declared, it's not granted. You have to fight for it, you have to acquire it, and you have to struggle for it.
Okay, so now we are reaching the end of this show. I want to talk about the leadership.
All right.
There is no independence without leaders.
Yes.
In every country or every continent, we had people fighting for independence.
Yes.
Some went to the like parliament and stuff to try to, like French Africa, and others shed their blood for that. What is the role of leaders in achievement of that independence?
Thank you for this question. That is an interesting question. And by the way, the leaders have a massive responsibility. I would even say a responsibility, the responsibility of generation. Because we have the young people who are more and more tired of that discourse, of that narrative, of being infantilized, of being, of looking at them being submitted to the former colonial powers without even having a vision for the youngsters, a clear vision for the future. So as far as I'm concerned, leadership here, it is the ability to build a clear vision for the unity of African countries. That's a narrative and an argument that was designed by the scholars like Sheikh Anta Diop, looking at how we can really unite, not only just in discourse, in theories.
Thank you, Dr. 𝐷𝐔𝐄𝐒 Kagale-Inda. I remember that you are professor in philosophy.
Assistant professor, I would
Assistant
say.
professor, at 𝐷𝐔𝐄𝐒 Omar Bongo University. Thank you for coming to our show.
Thank you for inviting me.
No problem. So you can still keep watching Gabon 24. Your show of guests will be there the next day, the day after this day, and we are here for you. And we were asking today, is Africa truly sovereign? Hope you got your answer during this show. Thank you. See you next time.